Every person on earth knows this story. It has given us a phrase, a shorthand for the impossible made possible, the small overcoming the great, that we use every day in sports, in politics, in business, in any contest where one side is vastly outmatched and wins anyway. David and Goliath. But I want to suggest today that we've been somewhat misreading this story, or rather that we've been reading only its surface. Because when you bring Alfred Adler's framework to bear on the story of David, not just this one scene, but the whole arc of David's early life, what you find is not simply a tale of miraculous victory. You find something much more psychologically intricate, a portrait of what it means to grow up feeling insufficient and what that insufficiency makes possible. Alfred Adler is one of the great figures of early psychoanalysis and one of the most underappreciated. He was, like Freud and Jung, a Viennese Jew working in the first decades of the 20th century. He was part of Freud's inner circle before breaking with him decisively in 1911, partly over Freud's insistence that sexuality was the primary driver of human psychology. Adler thought this was far too narrow. He argued that the central dynamic of human psychological life was something else entirely, the feeling of inferiority and the drive to overcome it. This is Adler's great contribution, the concept of the inferiority complex, not as a pathology, though it can be one, but as a universal feature of human experience. Every human being, Adler argued, begins life in a condition of smallness. We are children, we are dependent, we are weak. The world around us is large, powerful, and frequently indifferent to our needs. And from the universal experience of smallness, every human being develops a strategy, a way of compensating, of striving towards what Adler called superiority, meaning not dominance over others, but a sense of competence, of mastery, of mattering. The healthiest forms of this striving, Adler said, are directed towards genuine contribution, towards becoming actually capable, actually useful, actually connected to a community larger than oneself. The unhealthiest forms are neurotic compensations, grandiosity, aggression, or the opposite, collapse into helplessness, that are really about managing the wound of inadequacy without addressing it. Now, holding all of this in mind, let's look at David. David appears in the story at what seems like the most unpromising moment possible. The prophet Samuel has been sent by God to anoint the next king of Israel. God has rejected Saul, and now a new king must be found. Samuel arrives at the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. Jesse has 8 sons. Samuel looks at them one by one, starting with the eldest, Eliab, a tall, impressive man. He thinks, surely this is the one. And God says, do not look at his appearance or his height. The Lord does not see as mortals see. Mortals look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 7 sons pass before Samuel. None of them is the one. Samuel asks Jesse, are all your sons here? And Jesse says, almost as an afterthought, there remains the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep. The youngest, the one tending the animals, the one not important enough to bring in from the field when the prophet arrived. Jesse sends for him, and when David comes in, the text notes that he is ruddy and handsome with beautiful eyes. But what is not noted at this point is anything about his stature or his strength. He is a boy. He has been watching sheep. And God says, this is the one. Now we come to the valley of Elah, where the Philistine army has been encamped against Israel, and where Goliath of Gath stands and taunts the Israelites every morning and evening for 40 days. Goliath is described with remarkable specificity. He is over 9 feet tall. His bronze armor weighs around 125 pounds. His spear shaft is like a weaver's beam. He has a shield bearer who walks ahead of him. He is, in every physical dimension, the most formidable warrior in the text, and no one in Israel will fight him. David arrives at the camp, not as a soldier, but to bring food to his brothers. He hears Goliath's taunting. He asked the men around him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine?" His eldest brother Eliab rounds on him furiously. "Why have you come down here? Who is looking after those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil in your heart. You came down just to watch the battle." This little exchange is worth pausing on. Eliab's contempt is immediate and total. "Those few sheep. You are a shepherd boy. You are nobody. How dare you even ask this question?" And David's response is wonderful. "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turns away from Eliab and asks someone else the same question. He does not fight his brother's contempt. He doesn't need to. He knows something about himself that Eliab doesn't, and he turns away and keeps asking. When David is brought before Saul and offers to fight Goliath, Saul's response is almost identical to Eliab's. "You are not able to fight this Philistine. You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." And David says, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. And if it rose against me, I caught it by its jaw and struck it down and killed it. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them." This is not boasting in Adler's framework. This is something very precise. The articulation of a competence that was developed in invisibility, while no one was watching, while he was out in the field with those few sheep. David has not been idle in his smallness. He has been practicing. He has been developing a skill with a sling, with a stone, with the kind of precise, calm attention that comes from being alone with animals in the wilderness for years, that no one in that army knows about because no one considered him worth watching. Adler would recognize this immediately. The compensation for felt inferiority, when it is healthy, is not fantasy or aggression. It is actual development. It is the quiet, persistent, unglamorous work of becoming genuinely capable. Saul tries to arm David with his own armor, the bronze helmet, the coat of mail, the sword. And David tries them on and says, "I cannot walk in these, for I'm not used to them." He takes them off. He takes his staff. He chooses 5 smooth stones from the brook. He has his sling. He does not try to become Goliath. He does not try to fight Goliath's battle on Goliath's terms. He goes out to meet the giant with the tools he has, the tools of the shepherd, the tools of the field, the tools of the smallest and most overlooked person in the army. Goliath sees him coming and is insulted. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" He curses David. He says, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." And David runs towards him. He runs. He puts his hand in his bag, takes a stone, slings it, and strikes Goliath on the forehead. The giant falls. David takes Goliath's own sword and cuts off his head. Adler would say, "Notice what just happened. A man who spent his whole life being told he was too small, too young, or too unimportant went out to meet the largest opponent he had ever faced, with the skills he had developed precisely because he had been left alone to develop them, and won. Not despite being the youngest and smallest, in some sense because of it." This is the deepest insight in Adler's whole system, that the feeling of inferiority, when it is metabolized rather than suppressed or denied, becomes the raw material for extraordinary capability. The people who have something to prove, who have spent years feeling insufficient, often develop abilities and determination that people who felt entitled from the start never needed to develop. But Adler was always careful about the shadow side of this, because the same dynamic that produces genuine courage can also produce grandiosity, a need for constant validation, an inability to tolerate any diminishment. And in David's later life, as we discussed in an earlier episode, we see exactly this shadow side emerge. The man who ran towards the giant in the valley of Elah one day found himself on a palace roof, unable to tolerate the limits of what was his. The gift and the wound often come from the same source. Adler knew this. The inferiority complex that drives extraordinary achievement does not simply evaporate once the achievement arrives. It requires constant tending. It requires the person to develop what Adler called Gemeinschaftsgefühl, or social feeling or community feeling, the sense that one's worth is rooted not in being the greatest, but in genuine contribution to something beyond oneself. David at his best, the shepherd, the psalmist, the leader who wept over his enemies and his children, was a man with genuine Gemeinschaftsgefühl. David at his worst forgot that his worth did not depend on having everything he wanted. There is a beautiful detail at the end of the battle. Saul asks his general Avner, "Whose son is this young man?" And Avner says, "I don't know." And Saul says, "Find out whose son this young man is." Just hours after the battle, the man who has just saved Israel, and the king doesn't know whose son he is. He was that invisible. He was that invisible, and he ran towards the giant anyway, stone in hand, eyes clear, knowing what he could do.